Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hi everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2719 of The Tom Woods Show, and I'm delighted to have with us Ursula Conway, who is co-founder of something called the COVID Index, which happens to be the very topic of our conversation today, as well as being president emeritus of Children's Health Defense, the Arizona chapter. And I feel confident that the vast bulk of my listeners will be familiar with Children's Health Defense. They're all wonderful people doing important, very often anti-establishment work to get the word out about the truth about so many important aspects of our health. So Ursula, I'm glad to get to know you and welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to share what we're learning and what kind of information we're providing.
Well, I don't want you to think that I am an incorrigible ego case, but I will say I went to the COVID Index, which I'm going to ask you to tell us about in a minute, and I did type in my own name. just out of curiosity, and a couple things popped up. It made me happy. In a few minutes, I actually want to tell everybody what I have in the COVID Index. But what is the COVID Index, and then how do people find it?
The COVID Index is a massive directory of information related to COVID-19, the experimental jabs, and everything related to those COVID years. It has been compiled so that those of us doing research or trying to hold people accountable have a simple way or a more simple way to get to information. And right now we've got about more than 2,000 items in our database. So we get you there quickly.
Well, so it's, now what's the website?
covidindex.science.
covidindex.science. So I'm looking at it on my screen right now. And I just typed in my last name. I just typed in Woods, and three things came up. Two of them are mine. And so I would like to share them if you don't mind, then we'll continue. Because these are things
that's a great idea.
I'm quite happy with. And I'm glad that there's a way in which they're going to be preserved into the future. One of them was just because I was so tired of having these debates with people on social media who thought the alleged mitigation measures were doing a lot of good. And I just thought, have you people not seen any of the charts? None of this does anything. So along with my friend Tim Scott, who did the technical stuff, we developed something called COVID Charts Quiz. And this is the kind of quiz that a normie is just going to fail. And nobody likes failing a quiz, right? So this will help them maybe rethink things. So it would be questions like, all right, here we have a chart, and it's depicting health outcomes in two states, but we're not going to tell you which two they are. And one of them followed this protocol, one of them didn't. And which one do you think is which? And it's the opposite of what you would think. And this just happened time and time again. So we had all different kinds of questions relating to charts on COVID, and we just put it up there as the COVID charts quiz. And then at the end, you would, or as you were going through, it would grade you. It would tell you if you were right or wrong, and then it would give you the full explanation for each one. And it's just made my life easier. I would just say, all right, go take this quiz. I don't even want to have to deal with this. I don't want to bring out the charts. I already did this. Go take the quiz. And if you fail, ask yourself, why did I fail? And then the other thing of mine that's in here, I'm excited because I half forgot about some of these things, is I wrote an ebook called COVID Charts CNN Forgot. And that's like in 4 words, that tells you exactly what is in this thing. That in other words, these are charts that are not compatible with the standard narrative of what happened to us during these years. And so this is an opportunity for people to get that ebook. So that ebook won't just disappear into the ether. It's there preserved in the COVID Index. So this is really pleasing to me. What is your background, first of all? How did you come to be involved in Children's Health Defense?
Oh, gosh. When we talk about COVID, we don't very often talk about any benefits that we've derived from the COVID times. But honestly, I was retired, Southern Arizona, enjoying my life when suddenly the government started telling me, ordering what I was allowed to do. and what I had to do, like get an injection if I wanted to participate in society. So at about the same time, Children's Health Defense had begun rolling out state chapters. And so the pressure from the government, this ridiculous belief that they got to be in charge of my life to that extent, and the opportunity with Children's Health Defense just dovetailed. And I had already, for decades actually, been on my own more natural health journey. I had already been well acquainted with the larger vaccine discussion. And so it was a prime opportunity for me to join Children's Health Defense in 21, I believe, and work with the Arizona chapter. I very quickly became president of the chapter, and we spent our time using all of my business background. I came out of an IT environment in hospitality and gaming. So I had managed people and budgets and all of those things. And we just put those skills to work and developed an audience here in Arizona.
Did you have to deal with I don't know how I feel about the word censorship, because censorship really is a government thing. But there's no other word really. Suppression, let's say, on the part of platforms like YouTube and other big tech platforms. Did you guys feel like you were constantly up against that?
I feel like we're still up against that. It isn't at the same level that it used to be, but blatant censorship where organizations like YouTube would strike down videos. Twitter, for a long time before Elon took it over, would just suppress posts and information. And then there's also shadow banning. There are the warnings that come up about this information isn't the same as what HHS is providing. So censorship in a very broad sense still exists. We still need to be militant about it. The right to free speech and to hear what everybody is saying on a topic, I just think is central to our lives here in the United States of America.
I have to say, it amuses me now that the official censors now have to deal with the fact that HHS is run by the exact opposite of the previous regime. So now what are they going to do? Are they going to say, well, we're going to censor it anyway, even though the message is what's coming out of the official sources, because we're also going to stand in judgments of the official sources and say the official sources should have been these sources. So we should, they're going to be tied up in knots figuring out what to do, is the way I thought about it.
You know, it's so true. And it's unfortunate that speech has become so political. I'm sure you're aware that within the last week, one of the advisory committees met and made a recommendation that the Hep B vaccine not be given to infants on the day they're born.
Yeah.
Well, within 48 hours, I believe it was, we had a message from the Arizona Health and Human Services Department saying, we're not going along with HHS recommendations. We're sticking to our guns and we're going to keep injecting children. So in addition to censorship, we have this very unfortunate political camp, if you will. And that's a problem for us. It's the new barrier for us to try and break through and penetrate.
Yeah, because, quote, the science is like, as we learned from COVID, it's this impenetrable barrier to the advancement of knowledge. It's this, and they try to claim, oh, science is always evolving and changing. It actually seems like a series of propositions that they're going to stick to come hell or high water. It does not look like the way they describe it as a constant search for greater understanding as people with different points of view come at loggerheads with each other. And it's not like that at all. It's that we've had this idea for 25 years, so we're sticking with it. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. I mean, what could be that controversial of all possible things to consider controversial? Delaying the Hep B vaccine? That? When we know on the record, we know they've said that the reason that they're giving it to infants in the first place is they can't convince the adults to take it, so we'll give it to infants. There's nothing scientific about that. That's a political decision.
It absolutely is a political decision. And There have been a couple of new books released, one by Peter McCullough, one by Aaron Siri. Both of them are looking at this phenomenon that we're dealing with, and it's as though science has become a religion, and you either believe it or you're a heretic. And that's the battle that we're in right now, is that anybody who disagrees with whoever came up with the religion, we're all labeled heretics and stupid and evil and whatnot.
I had Joseph Ladapo on my show. He's the Surgeon General of the state of Florida.
Well acquainted.
Oh, I was telling the audience that I know you would know who he is. But when I had him on, I said, your Wikipedia entry begins by saying, Joseph Ladapo is a conspiracy theorist, this whole laundry list of accusations against you. And I said, I know that the purpose of that is to drive me away. But I said, instead, I read it and said to myself, this guy sounds like a great guy, But back on the suppression of information thing, I remember I live in Florida, and I followed Governor DeSantis very closely because he was bringing in really good, sound, knowledgeable people, one of whom is currently the director of the NIH, Jay Bhattacharya, early on, and was holding roundtables with them to show that there are credentialed people out there who think that what's being recommended in terms of COVID mitigation measures is just bonkers. And that one of those roundtables was censored on YouTube. They suppressed it on YouTube. And I thought, no matter what my political opinions are, I want to know what my governor is saying. It's important to me and my life to know what the guy who has, this purported authority over me is saying about this. And they wouldn't even let you listen. They wouldn't even let you listen. I brought a U.S. congressman on this very show, Thomas Massey. They suppressed that interview. And they don't even tell you why. What I love is they don't even deign to tell you what your offense was. It's just, well, we've decided that it's against our terms or whatever. So the only thing we could think was we made fun of masking at one point. That was the only thing that touched on anything YouTube would care about. We made fun of it as not really accomplishing anything. And now they don't take that down anymore because it's obvious to everybody that masks are ridiculous and don't work. But anyway, I don't mean to burden you with my problems, but I think we're all in the same boat here.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to recognize that Florida was a leader in seeking the truth, in being willing to entertain voices that were different from those that were ordering our behavior. And then the other thing that I think is interesting is that those people who cling to censorship, you can only have one truth. What are they going to do when somebody else holds office, when someone of an opposing viewpoint holds office and suppresses them? It is a two-way street, and it's a terrible precedent to set that anybody gets to decide what information we're going to have access to.
Well, and building on that, when they say, well, we're not trying to suppress free speech, we're just trying to suppress misinformation. Well, all right, but the issue there is who gets to decide what's misinformation and what isn't? That's the danger, right. Especially because the people making these decisions do not have a particularly impressive track record in being able to distinguish between misinformation and truth. So that was the issue. Who gave you the right to distinguish between these things?
Yeah, I do wish that everybody would reread 1984 to see where this kind of manipulation and control can lead, because we got way too close to it in our real lives.
What's the goal of the COVID index?
Well, our primary goal is to preserve information. You already mentioned you're glad that your publications are available there. We want to preserve information. We want to make sure that it's available. We want to hold people accountable for what's been done. There were a lot of damages, from economic damages primarily to small businesses to all of the physical impact. There are lots of debates about how many people have been killed by the experimental injections, how many have been injured. Conservatively, I think the VAERS is at around 40,000 people killed and I don't know, 60 million injured. They're enormous numbers. And everywhere I go, I see the effects. I see people who have physical conditions now that they didn't have before. And so we want to hold the cabal accountable for what they've done to people. We'd also like to see some type of compensation for all of these people who've been injured or killed. And ultimately, we want to be the go-to resource for litigators who are mounting lawsuits to protect, preserve, and compensate these injured folks. By the way, we have had great feedback from several litigators already about how valuable this resource is, this directory of information.
Hey, gang, I hope you'll join me in my mad steak buying frenzy. It's the perfect gift, and I've got a fantastic deal. This year at omahasteaks.com, the whole site is 50% off. Plus, with code WOODS, you get another $35 off. So I've been sending big boxes of steaks left and right. I sent one to Bob Murphy, as you know. Sent another one to Stefan Kinsella. I sent one to the guy who does the audio here. I just sent one to my personal trainer. He will already have received it by the time this episode airs, so I'm not spoiling anything. But lots of steaks have been sent out by Old Woods because I'm just using my own code. There's no law against that. 50% off already, but with code WOODS at omahasteaks.com, it's another $35 off. And right now is the perfect time to save on delicious gifts and holiday hosting favorites from Omaha Steaks. They're a family-owned company. They've got over 100 years of expertise in the meat industry, and every steak they're going to send out is perfectly aged to maximize tenderness. They've got an exclusive lineup of USDA-certified tender steaks that everybody on your list is going to love, but they also carry, so you can send a variety box if you want, mouth-watering burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, cozy and convenient comfort meals, and delectable desserts. And every bite is backed by their 100% guarantee. So save big on gourmet gifts and more holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide during their Sizzle All the Way sale. And for an extra $35 off, use promo code WOODS at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That's omahasteaks.com, code WOODS. Well, I can certainly understand the value of that because it's not the job of the litigator, or I don't expect a litigator to be an expert on something, but I expect by the time he goes in there to have a whole lot of knowledge, but he has to know where to find it. I need something on masks, or I need something on whatever the thing is, and then with just a few keystrokes, he instantly finds what he wants. That's highly, highly valuable. And of course, it goes beyond just that, because there are also citizens. There are also people who live in this country, or indeed around the world, who would prefer that this not happen again, and would like to be equipped with knowledge, and who are inclined to think. I'll say even this. I think what happened was the Ukraine war came along in early 2022, just as there was starting to be more and more of a reckoning of what had just gone on. And as we were starting to realize that the things that had been done by policymakers were purely destructive and had no merit at all, and particularly what was done to children. Because I remember I was invited to a roundtable. Governor DeSantis had another roundtable discussion, and he wanted some quote-unquote influencers there to live blog it. Well, I didn't have to be asked twice. I showed up with my laptop and I live blogged that thing like I have never, or live tweeted it. I live tweeted it like I've never tweeted before. And he was saying, this is we cannot let them just say, well, that's over. Now we're on to the next thing. We have got to keep this thing on the front burner. But then everybody's attention turned to Ukraine. And then it was like, well, okay, but presumably we can do both, right? We can talk about Ukraine and this. But that turned out not to be the case. And I feel like I kept writing about this and talking about it to a point where some people started to say, maybe it's time to move on, talk about something else. And I just thought I don't think there's any time in our history where there was a governmental outrage perpetrated on us and we said, well, let's just forget it. And a good result came from that. The good result comes only if you keep making sure, at the very least, that the conventional wisdom in the future about what happened during this time was not that wise public health officials were trying to protect the people, but we had these dum-dums who just wouldn't listen. If that becomes the conventional wisdom, then we're just sitting ducks forever. And so this COVID index is a very helpful resource to prevent that from happening.
It is, and its origination is really very humble. It began because a pharmacist in Arizona wanted to be able to take evidence to his employer to say, this is why I don't want to be vaccinated. It was as simple as that. And honestly, a bunch of volunteers ended up gathering together in order to grow the index and take it from what was a PDF to this interactive application that we hope to soon introduce some AI to. And just one other point about it, we approached it looking for the contrarian evidence because it was easy to find all of the government forced drivel about how wonderful everything was. Yeah. It was not so easy to find everything that was being suppressed. So it is viewed with a contrarian lens to provide all of that information.
Yeah, that is terrific. So are there ways people can actually get involved in this project?
Oh, yes, we'd love that. As I mentioned, we're a bunch of volunteers who put this together, and one of the most critical roles is to be a research associate. One of those people who's out in the field and says, oh my God, this is such an interesting study, it belongs in there. And so on the website, on covidindex.science, there's a tab that says, how can you help? And you go there, fill out an application to be a research associate, and we train you. And then you get to help us grow the database.
Well, let me ask you this, though. If you were the president of the Arizona chapter of Children's Health Defense, you surely came across skeptics who didn't buy into your approach to health questions. And you must have had to deal with the, well, look, such and such authority says you're wrong, or my doctor doesn't agree with you. Why should I listen to you instead of these people who have all these letters after their names?
Tom, I don't even have to go to our large number of defenders within the state. I can go within my own family because we have a pretty good-sized family and nobody wanted to listen to me at the beginning. But because I was able to stay current and keep providing additional information, I made quiet inroads. So that two of my siblings backed away from the rote following of the directives. In terms of the broader audience, people who participate in children's health defense are generally more inclined to be skeptical. They already know that our kids are getting less healthy every year. And so our membership, our defenders, if you will, just needed more information. It's when we go outside the tent and try and engage others that we begin to get more pushback about how could that be? Surely the government wouldn't be lying to us. So it's an interesting dilemma in how much effort you spend trying to persuade people and what techniques to use. And it's not a straight line, that's for sure. I'm pretty fact-based. I generally think, oh my gosh, if I show you some charts, surely that will be persuasive.
Oh my gosh, you're speaking my language. I'm telling you. If I show you some charts, that was the way. That was my. I got so many charts up there over the however many years it was that I would send to my email newsletter people every day, and there'd always be some chart that contradicted what they were saying.
Right.
And I wasn't under the illusion that the people in charge care about the charts. That I get. But the average person whose life is really upended by all this, I thought the average person really cared deeply about his own life. I really did. I thought he would stand up for it. And they couldn't have gotten away with this if so many people hadn't been so passive about their own lives. The most important thing is their lives. And they were willing to say, oh, well, I guess this part of my life is ruined, or my career is destroyed, or my savings are depleted, but better put on my mask. I just can't, especially when there was, yes, it was suppressed from time to time, but there was contrary information out there. It could be found. It was way easier to find it than it would have been in the old days of ABC, NBC, and CBS. And, you just had to look a little bit. If you cared enough about your life to do a few searches online, you would have found it. So I walked away from this with my view of mankind, I think, permanently diminished, frankly.
Yeah, that is troubling to walk away with that impression. And I would suggest to you that it seemed to me people like to outsource their health. They don't want to have to weigh alternative approaches and facts and make a decision themselves. They prefer to just say, my doctor said do X. And so that goes to a larger problem of a lack of critical thinking skills, a lack of analytical skills, or just simply a laziness on that front of wanting somebody else to handle it for them. It's a challenge.
Well, the thing is, in principle, if I didn't feel like the medical system were so screwed up, in principle, I would like there to be an expert who gives me solid guidance on my health. In the same way that I wouldn't try to fix a complicated plumbing problem without bringing in a plumber, and I wouldn't have to investigate his credentials or question him at every turn. If medicine could be like that, then sure, I would probably look into various alternatives, but I would like there to be somebody in the same way that in a legal dispute, I assume there's somebody who's read all the law books. I want to go to that guy, but unfortunately, in this crucial area of our lives, the most important one of all, now, thanks to people like you, I now have to go around asking more questions than I used to. I was not really a skeptic of the medical establishment until COVID, if you can believe it. I was a skeptic of everything on earth except that. And now, I just told this story in my newsletter a few days ago, but for example, a few years ago, I went into my doctor and I had reached age 50. And at age 50, they start to tell you it's time for your shingles vaccine. Now, what do I know about the shingles vaccine?
Right.
Zero. And the guy was saying it's 87% effective against shingles. Now, Ursula, if this had been 7 years ago, I would have rolled up my sleeve right on the spot and said, go ahead and give it to me. But instead, I sat there and thought, 87% effective. Huh? Well, I've seen what you guys call 100% effective, and I'm not impressed. So did you calculate this 87% using the same math that you used for that? So in other words, I couldn't any longer just say, oh, sure, you're the man in the white coat with the clipboard and the stethoscope. Sure, go ahead and do it. So that's been ruined for me, but it's for the best. But I live in a different world now than I did in the first 50 years of my life.
You are right. It would be much more pleasant to be able to just trust the medical establishment. Unfortunately, an awful lot was revealed during COVID, including all of these perverse financial incentives that have been guiding where healthcare has gone. So there's a lot to be concerned about and a lot to fix. And I'm glad that we have an HHS leader who is focused on making those changes.
Yeah, and who can do pull-ups. Good grief, that guy can do pull-ups. Did you see that video of RFK and Secretary Duffy doing the pull-ups at the airport?
I did.
Jeez, not too shabby. Holy cow. It inspires us all, that when we're in our 70s, maybe we can still do stuff like that. So that is terrific. So the website is covidindex.science.
Right.
Really easy to remember. Go check it out. You just type in something you're interested in, and boom, things pop up, but you can participate in this important project. Again, we need these big bodies of knowledge, of these repositories of knowledge, to be a standing resource in perpetuity. After what was done to us, that's the very least we can do. But also it can be used, we hope, to fight for justice in these cases that are ongoing. Because you have this great body of knowledge you can use to advance your point. So Ursula Conway, so the link we want to urge people to visit is just simply covidindex.science.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And I would just like to remind your audience that there's a basic search and a more advanced search. So if you know that you're looking for a speech or a paper that was written by Brian Hooker, you can narrow your search to just those by Brian Hooker.
Oh, that's really great. Okay, so makes it super easy to find things. Okay,
Right.
terrific. Well, Ursula, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your involvement in this important project and for the opportunity for me to be able to promote it to a lot of people who I hope will help advance it.
We really appreciate your help, and we hope to see a lot of litigators and a lot of volunteers joining us.
Thank you very much, Ursula. And the rest of you folks, I want you to stay tuned because I'm going to share with you the opening statement that I made at a debate on these questions where I show a lot of these charts. If you're listening in audio, you can still get all the value out of it. But if you're watching on video, tomwoods.com/2719, it'll be a little easier for you, but you'll still enjoy it. I'm not sharing the whole debate because my debate opponent couldn't make it. So it just became an evening with me, but it is like a one-stop shop of the case against all the crazy things they did to us. So stay tuned for that. Thanks once again, Ursula. It's been wonderful having you.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very sorry about the conditions tonight and what's happened with Brent and his granddaughter. I saw her picture on Twitter just the other day, and I think Gene will agree with me that when you're a father yourself or a mother, stories like this hit harder. And I extended to him my deepest condolences over this truly unspeakable tragedy. It makes everything else seem trivial, honestly. On a somewhat happier note, I would like to say something about Gene Epstein, our moderator, that I don't think I would have been able to get away with otherwise, because it would have looked like I was kissing up to the moderator. But first of all, I will say, Gene started off by explaining that one-on-one debates are his preferred way of doing things. That really is the best. We should have one-on-one debates. And I thought about that, and I thought, wasn't that funny? When I first met Gene Epstein, he and I were in a two-on-two debate. So I'm wondering if he's drawn this conclusion from his experience being a debater on my team. I just want one-on-one from now on. The other thing is, I do want to say, and I say this from the bottom of my heart, that what Gene is doing alongside the Reason Foundation with the Soho Forum is really a light in the darkness. Because as everybody in this room knows, we are extremely divided these days and have been for a number of years, to the point that it's very hard to have civil discussions because people have concluded that an innocent difference of opinion just doesn't exist. It's you're a terrible person. And so conversation becomes impossible. And yet the Soho Forum debates very controversial and important matters and does so in a way that consistently generates more light than heat. And that, as I say, is a rarity in today's world. So I, for one, want to thank Gene Epstein for what he's been doing. All right, so I think I'm more or less implicitly integrating my response to Brent's statement via Gene, although I may add a little bit more in the Q&A portion. So beginning in March 2020, people around the world were told that people in places who obeyed the so-called public health guidelines, so lockdowns, masks, capacity restrictions, and the like, would have relatively good results, while the stupid and selfish science haters who disregarded the guidelines would surely get what was coming to them. This moralizing narrative that the regime fed us does not survive a glance at the overwhelming majority of the data and the charts, of which I spent the past few years compiling more than I can count. Not models, not speculation, not extrapolation, but the actual experiences of real people and places. It was already clear from the early contact tracing study in Iceland in the late winter of 2020 that schools were no danger, and at a time when people were being urged to stay home, studies involving Google mobility data, so some of the cell phone data that Brent mentioned. I'm going to say Brent instead of Gene, you understand? That actually the overall conclusion from that data is that there was no correlation at all between health outcomes and people moving around as opposed to staying home. I realize that may seem counterintuitive, but there just isn't. We've looked at it and there's no correlation. But let's start with two outstanding examples, because there was a country that was left out of the discussion. In fact, I understand we primarily tend to think about our own country, but I think it can be useful to have a global perspective on what just happened to us. So I do want to talk about Sweden. So think back to March 2020. Sweden, for the most part, proceeded as normal, and we now know it had the best excess death rate numbers in Europe. The best. It outperformed everyone. Now, if I had asked lockdowners in March 2020, what will happen in Sweden if the government doesn't lock down society and impose masks on everyone? Do you think they would have said to me, oh, Sweden will probably have the best results in all of Europe? Of course not. And in fact, we don't have to speculate because the internet is forever. Sweden is going to be a killing field, a bloodbath, an example to the world of what not to do, you name it. But as I said, Sweden, the country that the political establishment around the world roundly condemned for not imitating everyone else, had the best excess death numbers in all of Europe. Apparently, the COVID measures weren't essential because the European country that most ostentatiously refused to impose them ended up having the best results. Now, if we lived in a normal country, we'd all be talking about how this was possible and how our own public health establishment could have gotten things so wrong. But we don't, so we don't. Throughout these years, you and I were urged to listen to the experts, a phrase it's difficult today to utter without a snicker. But the experts had no idea what was going on either. In early 2021, for example, White House COVID advisor Andy Slavitt was asked on MSNBC, of all places, why the numbers for California and Florida were so similar despite their drastically different policy responses, and it's downright astonishing how flat-out bad his answer was. Quote, "There's so much of this virus that we think we understand and we think we can predict that's just a little beyond our explanation," unquote. So you got that? He has no answer. This was one of the alleged experts you were expected to follow. Drain your savings, miss your surgery, cancel everything that brings you joy, and when it does no good, let's keep on doing it, which is what he also told MSNBC. Anthony Fauci assured us that states that obeyed him would have better results. Everyone assumed those would be drastically different results, that places refusing to comply would face downright catastrophic numbers. That's just not the case. And when you adjust for age, and I personally think we should also adjust for obesity, it's dramatically not the case. When Fauci was asked why there weren't corpses lining the streets after Texas reopened, his response was, quote, "Maybe they're doing things outdoors," unquote. I'm being charitable when I call that a non-answer. All we wanted was for somebody to say, this is hard to understand, and we're not even sure that the things we're recommending make any sense. We're just trying the best we can. I just wanted something like that. In Japan, they did get something like that. In Japan, one of their experts, I'll never forget, said, quote, "Even the experts don't understand the reason," unquote, when trying to account for how well Japan did. Japan did not follow the quote unquote pandemic preparedness recommendations, even though if you look back before 2020, nobody was calling for society-wide lockdowns. Japan ended up doing pretty well. In the US, everybody had an explanation. Oh, it must be the masks they wore. Like it's got to be the religion. They go back to the religion every time. It's the masks, it's the lockdowns. Okay, but they didn't have a very strict lockdown, so then what else was it? Well, then it must have been the masks. But the problem was, at the time people were predicting that Tokyo would be a disaster area, they were already wearing masks, so you can't have it both ways. Well, it turns out I had somebody on my show. Now that the episode is in the can, I can say it. Not worry about offending the guy. It's years ago, but I had Dr. Eric Topol on my show, and he said the reason Japan did well is that the government shipped masks to everybody, 50 million masks, and that's why they did well. What he didn't bother to find out about was everybody in Japan laughed at those masks because they were accidentally the wrong size. They sent children's masks to everybody. Nobody could fit them, so they weren't used. But because we've assumed a priori that these things work, we just assign that explanation to places like Japan. Now, California and Florida, back to the US, they really do constitute an important case study. Because again, suppose if I'd asked in March 2020, What will happen if California locks down heavily and Florida is more or less laissez-faire? What would the response have been? Well, Florida's going to be a bloodbath. I mean, and not only would they have said that, it's what they did say. You will recall the governor of Florida becoming known, ludicrously enough, as Ron Death Santis. But in terms of age-adjusted COVID mortality, which is the number that counts, with number 1 being the highest death rate, according to the CDC's own data, Florida was all the way down at 36 when all was said and done. Not one person screaming at Florida or condemning its governor would have predicted that outcome, not a single one. So they were wrong. It's okay to be wrong, just admit it. Now, in terms of that COVID list, California, it's true, was at number 39. But that's a trivial difference from Florida in light of the preposterous interventions under Gavin Newsom. But here's what really matters. Florida did better in terms of excess mortality, which is the figure we really want to look at because it avoids the complications surrounding coding a COVID death. It includes the deaths by lockdowns. And in general, it's just more thorough. Now, had the propaganda been true and these measures really been essential, this outcome would have been impossible. Once again, unless we're just going to be impervious to evidence, it's impossible to call these measures essential. In fact, I can spend all night showing you charts of neighboring states, identical demographics, with sharply different policies, and you'd have no way of telling which was which. And if these inhuman restrictions are to be justified, the differences between stringent and lenient places had better jump off the page, but they just don't. So yet again, suppose I'd asked in March 2020, if I compare stringent states and counties with more lackluster states and counties, will the results be immediately evident without having to insert 150 nitpicking caveats? Everyone would, of course, said yes. And once again, they would have been dead wrong. Most of America never saw any of the charts and would no doubt be shocked and confused if they did see them, because the charts refuse to convey the moralizing narrative. So let's start by plotting the 25 most stringent states against the 25 least stringent. So most versus least stringent US states. Those are the two lines, but I haven't told you which is which. Can you tell? Shouldn't we be able to? At the very least, shouldn't we be able to? Now, I think this wins the debate, but I'm a sport. I got more stuff. I have more time. So if you're going to tell me that these measures were essential, you better be able to tell me which line is which. But since you're dying to know, this one is the more stringent. But wait a minute, what's the difference? If you, I beg your pardon? Which one is the? Oh, the one that I just made thicker. The orange line just became thicker. Okay, these are my technical skills that I have. Now, I have a lot of these. If you go to diaryofcovid.com, that's where my book is, and it's full of these. All right, here is a 2020 chart of the Midwestern states. Let's see if we can find Thanksgiving on this chart, because that should be easy, because remember, Thanksgiving gathering is going to kill everybody, and they're going to spread illness like wildfire, although remember, you have to wait 2 weeks, and then you'll see the effects. So the peak there, that ought to be that ought to be, let's see. So if Thanksgiving, we meet, let's say, somewhere around here, then 2 weeks later, we'll hit that peak. So Thanksgiving should have been down there, because it takes 2 weeks for people to see the symptoms. So Thanksgiving should be just to the left of that peak. So let's see where it is. You're wrong. Thanksgiving actually occurred while the numbers were going down. Can you find Christmas on this chart? Remember, Dr. Fauci wasn't sure in 2022 if we should have Christmas? Can you see Christmas on this chart? No, I sure can't. So if the big spike, okay, so we've done our holidays. That's enough holidays for now. How about mask mandate states? Okay, here are states with mask mandates. Here are states with no mask mandate. I was a sport this time. I labeled them. Although I have to give credit, of course, to the great Ian Miller, who put together so many of the charts that helped us through all this. But as you can see, I mean, the point is there should be a big difference, right? Isn't it kind of uncanny how closely they track each other? It's almost like every feeble intervention we try is like nothing. Well, let's keep going. If you're not convinced of that, how about, here are 2 neighboring states. Very different COVID policies. I'm not indicating to you which ones they are. And yet, look at this. The curves are, essentially identical. And I'm sure this is not what most Americans would expect to see in a graph of these places. So I'm going to show you which one is the more locked down one. That one. The purple, that's California, and red is Nevada. If I added Arizona to this chart, it would look the same. So Arizona had the fewest of the three in terms of restrictions. Nevada was in the middle. Nevada's a purple state, I guess appropriate enough, and then California. And yet, you look at them and they all look like this. They all look like this, despite our feeble interventions. We're going to talk about Iowa in a few minutes when we gear up to Iowa. Poor Iowa. The Washington Post called Iowa the state that doesn't care if you live or die. So wait till you see the incredible numbers with, but notice, by the way, if we look at these Midwestern states here, it's like they all, because remember the moralizing narrative is if you follow the rules, the numbers will go down. But if you're a stupid, anti-science stupid head, then the numbers will go up. But isn't it weird that across all these states, everybody seems to disobey at the same time, then obey, then disobey again? What are the odds of this? It's almost like it has nothing whatsoever to do with our behavior.
If you're like me, you've been watching the Fed inflate the dollar into oblivion while politicians bungle trade policy and rack up historic amounts of debt. You're wondering how to protect what you've worked so hard to build. Well, that's why I want to talk to you about Monetary Metals, a company doing something truly revolutionary with gold. We all know gold is a safe haven asset, but let's face it, most gold just sits there in a vault, not doing much. It holds its value over time, but it doesn't grow. What if I told you there's a way to not only own physical gold, but also earn a yield on it, paid in gold every single month? Well, that's exactly what I do with Monetary Metals. I lease my gold with them and earn an annual yield, around 4%, in gold, not in paper currency. I keep my ounces, and every month I get more. So think about it. You still benefit from any price appreciation, like what we've been seeing in 2025 with gold pushing past all-time highs, and you also get paid more ounces of gold along the way. That's what makes this model so exciting. It's a genuine breakthrough. For the first time in decades, gold is functioning as a yield-bearing asset, just like in the classical gold standard days. The Fed can print dollars. They can't print gold. It's time to start growing your wealth in ounces and not just hoping for the best with fiat. Go to monetary-metals.com/woods to learn more and see how you can start earning a gold income too. That's monetary-metals.com/woods. Hey everybody, a lot of people are all talk and no action, and I hate to see people in our world fall into that. And here's an action you can take. Join me in seceding from the American health insurance system. This open enrollment, millions of your fellow Americans are going to be snookered into staying trapped in the same dysfunctional American health insurance system. The Woods family doesn't play that game anymore. Affordable Care Act, give me a break. We were paying $3,000 a month for a policy that didn't even include my wife. So we ditched the old-fashioned way and embraced crowd health and have never felt more liberated. Crowd health is the alternative to the crazy American health insurance world. My business partner's done the same thing, my mastermind guys, and no wonder. We're talking about health care for under $100. You get access to a team of health bill negotiators, low-cost prescription and lab testing tools, as well as a database of low-cost, high-quality doctors vetted by Crowd Health. Something major happens, you pay the first $500, and then the crowd steps in to help fund the rest. Who's the crowd? A group of members just like you who want to help pay for each other's unexpected medical events. The system is betting you'll stay stuck in the same overpriced, overcomplicated mess. Don't give them the satisfaction. This open enrollment, take your power back. Join Crowd Health to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months using code WOODS at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, code WOODS. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out. Take your power back. This is how we win. Joincrowdhealth.com.
All right, well, I'm setting the stage here for my Iowa slide, telling you that Elaine Godfrey at The Atlantic wrote an article in November 2020 and saying, quote, public health experts predicted another big surge after the holidays, but it never came. Okay, so they admit it didn't happen. I went back to those experts to find out why. Now, isn't that classic American media? I went back to those experts who had no idea what was going on. I want to ask them for the answer. So she goes back to those experts and she wrote a follow-up article. It's unbelievable. The things people will do to defend their religion is beyond me. She wrote a follow-up article called "Iowans Were Scared into Taking the Virus Seriously." Now, here's what she means. She solved the mystery. Public health officials in Iowa had done such a good job panicking about a surge that they managed to get people to change their behavior. They scared them into changing their behavior. You know what the problem with that is? The simultaneous decline in many other places. So we're supposed to believe that Iowan public health officials back around the holidays of 2020 scared people so much that the scariness spread all the way into North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Minnesota, Missouri, Illinois, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Kansas, all of which had identical curves and declines in their numbers with no change in public health messaging and no change in the public's behavior. Again, it's almost as if our behavior has nothing to do with this. The alleged experts also tried to claim that Iowa's November mask mandate had also helped to bring their numbers down, but again, it's special pleading. There were simultaneous declines in all other places with all different policies. All right, so now back to Iowa, the state that doesn't care if you live or die. Well, one of these states is the one that doesn't care if you live or die. Let's see if we can figure it out. Okay, anybody want to bet his life on the answer? That's Iowa, right there. There was a thick line before that was just the average, but this pink one, that's Iowa. So Iowa, in other words, is indistinguishable, right? There's nothing particularly outstanding about Iowa, but of course you know the Washington Post, a year later, issued a solemn apology to the people of Iowa. Of course not. You know how our society, there's no apology. These people don't apologize, but oh my gosh, we have more work to do here. All right. This is the story of the entire period. The numbers go up and down in complete defiance of our feeble interventions. Yet the experts desperately try to pretend that the interventions are having an impact. Not to mention, in country after country and state after state, we got masks flattened the curve in the first half of 2020. Then the fall comes, mask compliance is unchanged, and the numbers are worse than before, and then we get silence. You know, we don't get, maybe we were a little cartoonish when we said masks flatten the curve. Maybe it was a bunch of things that did it. I'm sorry we imposed this neat little morality play on you. And all that. Again, you think these people apologize? Forget about it. So let's look. Here are Germany and Sweden. Very similar curves. I mean, it's almost eerie how similar. And again, I mean, imagine what are the odds that people would refuse to comply, and then all of a sudden they would comply again in two different countries at the same time, and then refuse to comply a little bit, and then comply again. I mean, again, bizarre. Well, you can see the American media attributing Germany's success to the non-pharmaceutical interventions, in particular masks. But there's no mention in the American media that Sweden is getting exactly those numbers, but basically not masking. If you went to Sweden, 1% to 2% of people in Stockholm were wearing masks, and most of them were, well, in fact, even into like 2022, most of them were American tourists. Though, I mean, I'm not joking. I went there. It was American tourists wearing the masks. The Swedes were, you know, well, I'll still serve you. I just don't know why you're doing that. But yeah, because it didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. And it's interesting. The reference to 1918. After 1918, everybody concluded that masks don't work. They obviously hadn't done anything. And masks are not a time-tested thing. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies looking at this. I mean, the mask literature is not a difficult thing to navigate because the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. I mean, the most recent study on it was the meta-study, the work in the Cochrane Review with the lead researcher, Dr. Tom Jefferson. Yes, I know he has a pretty nice name, but Dr. Tom Jefferson said, look, nothing about the science changed. In 2020, we all knew this didn't do anything. Like we have CDC studies looking at influenza. We all know this doesn't do anything. And nothing changed between 2020 and 2023, apart from, you know, Trump wasn't wearing a mask that much and people wanted to stick it to him or something, but that's not really science. So in any case, there's much more we can say about masks. We'll get back to that in the future. Here's Poland. This is very typical of an Eastern European country, early mask mandate, and then, of course, in the West, we get, well, look at this. They conquered it with masks, and if we weren't all a bunch of dum-dums, we would do the same thing, but we all hate science, and we're all burning the scientists or whatever. And this is not a good argument, because as you can see, there's also the right-hand side of the chart. This happens time and again. Such and such country, the Czech Republic, smashed the virus because they applied science and we're too stupid. That lesson over and over and over, then you'd get the right side of the chart and no media outlet would revisit that and say, okay, obviously there's more to it than that. Sorry, we insulted you and called you an idiot. I mean, obviously we don't really know what's going on here. Never, never. That thought would never occur to them. Here's the Czech Republic. And again, you can see Czech Republic has life-saving lesson for America. Wear a face mask. Okay. And then you see what happens with the Czech Republic, and there are no follow-up stories. Nothing. Nothing. So, and then I might add just very quickly on the mask question, the Cochrane Review, which is the gold standard. I mean, at the end of this, it's impossible to conclude anything other than it is irrational to be doing this. But they found no benefit. And even when you wear one of those suffocation masks that are sometimes called N95s, no benefit. And remember, too, Bavaria and Berlin actually mandated N95s. And if I have their chart up here, which I have in my book, you'll see you cannot tell the difference between Bavaria and Berlin and the rest of Germany. You cannot tell. Okay, so maybe there's this is kind of like somebody who tells you, I can speak 25 languages. And you say, oh my gosh, that's astonishing. Can you speak one of them for me now? No, and I will never speak any of them for you. Okay, I mean, maybe you speak them, but I see no reason to believe it. All right. During these creepy and irrational years, there was plenty of competition for the George Orwell Award, but making at least my personal top 10 is the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP. Without so much as an acknowledgement of the European experience, where they were not masking toddlers, the AAP had a case of childhood mask fanaticism to the extent that they systematically removed references on their website to any previous suggestions they might ever have made that babies might need to see human faces. So anything mentioning the importance of faces in child development, including a page called FaceTime and Emotional Health, and a description of how adults can enrich infants as young as 4 to 5 months old that involves repeated reference to facial cues and expressions, is now gone. Because I'm sure the science just dramatically changed, just like that. That's deranged. Okay, this is not normal behavior. So you see that those of us who didn't go along with this, we're not evil people who want to do rain dances to make it rain. We're just looking at the charts. I don't have a medical degree, but I have a brain and I can read a chart. And it all amounted to nothing. Everything that happened during these years was put through the same moralizing filter. In October and November 2020, Lakers and Dodgers fans were blamed for a spike in cases that occurred in Los Angeles County. Yet the same spike occurred in San Diego. And in case you don't know anything about California sports, I can assure you, people in San Diego were not out cheering for the Dodgers. The collateral effects on society of these radical interventions can probably never be fully calculated, and some of them, like the way these policies ruined friendships and pitted family members against each other, cannot be quantified in the first place. In some countries, Uganda, many others, 2 years went by with no education of any kind of children. In Myanmar, we heard stories of people resorting to eating snakes and rats because they had no incomes. Toby Green, a leftist, wrote a great book called The COVID Consensus, in which he described the lockdown policies as horrific crimes against the poorest peoples and countries, and I recommend that to you. In a comprehensive and authoritative review of lockdown harms, Kevin Bardosh concludes, quote, the promotion of lengthy social distancing restrictions by governments and scientific experts during the COVID crisis had severe consequences for hundreds of millions of people. Many original predictions are broadly supported by the cumulative research data presented above. A rise in non-COVID excess mortality, mental health deterioration, child abuse and domestic violence, widening global inequality, large increases in debt, food insecurity, lost educational opportunities, unhealthy lifestyle behaviors, increased loneliness and social polarization, democratic backsliding, and human rights violations, unquote. According to a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, the lockdown unemployment shock, a reference to the tens of millions suddenly thrown out of work, is projected to result in 840,000 to 1.22 million excess deaths over the next 15 to 20 years. As a direct result of the lockdowns, the New York Times reported in an article called "The Biggest Monster is Spreading and It's Not the Coronavirus" that there will be 1.4 million excess tuberculosis deaths, 500,000 excess HIV deaths, and 385,000 malaria deaths as a result of the lockdowns. During the COVID years, we heard plenty of state propaganda about social distancing and masks and why your kids couldn't go to the playground. What we absolutely did not hear were stories about people who suffered under these restrictions, and there are more of them than we can possibly count. Readers of my email newsletter wrote to me every day about families pitted against themselves, about devastated careers, about missed surgeries, about loved ones forced to die alone, about isolation and grief and frustration and sadness and incredulity that any of this could be happening in the first place. We never got to hear those stories. They weren't allowed. If you complained about the lockdowns, that was because you were a selfish person who wanted to get a haircut and then kill your grandmother. People were shamed into keeping silent about what was happening to them. Prudent and essential, more like reckless and insane. Now, it's extremely unusual for the architects of a policy to admit that mistakes were made, that things went wrong, that a collective blindness existed among them. That's just human nature. And that's why it's all the more startling to hear policymakers themselves express regret for what was done in 2020 and beyond. For example, Michael Osterholm, a Biden administration COVID advisor who's a University of Minnesota epidemiology professor, as late as November 2020 was recommending a hard national lockdown, just said in October 2023, quote, "There is actually no role for lockdowns," unquote. Francis Collins was director of the National Institutes of Health until 2023. He now says, quote, "As a guy living inside the Beltway, feeling a sense of crisis, trying to decide what to do in some situation room in the White House, we weren't really considering the consequences in communities that were not New York City or some other big city. If you're a public health person and you're trying to make a decision, you have this very narrow view of what the right decision is, and that is something that will save a life. It doesn't matter what else happens. So you attach infinite value to stopping the disease and saving a life. You attach a zero value to whether this actually totally disrupts people's lives, ruins the economy, and has many kids kept out of school in a way they never quite recovered from. This is a public health mindset, and I think a lot of us involved in trying to make those recommendations had that mindset, and that was really unfortunate. It's another mistake we made," unquote. So in retrospect, Francis Collins himself describes COVID policy as obsessively focused on one aspect of health to the exclusion of all others. And I know, in conclusion, what the lockdowners would like to say about all this. Yes, all these deaths and all this deprivation and the broken families and social wreckage and ruined health may have been tragic, but in the end it was all worth it because the policies accomplished so much. But as I've shown you, they just didn't. None of the alleged benefits of the so-called mitigation measures are perceptible in the data, which by definition means they were not essential. And if this madness can be called prudent, then words have lost their meanings and we as people have lost our minds. What was done to the United States and to the world during these years was an atrocity rooted more in hysteria and voodoo than in science and rationality. To this day, we continue to pay for these terrible decisions in countless gruesome ways. These measures should be condemned on scientific, practical, and moral grounds and in the strongest possible terms. The bipartisan American establishment deserves not our thanks and congratulations, but ridicule, moral outrage, and contempt. Thank you.
All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that. So don't forget, covidindex.science. And remember, of course, I have my book, Diary of a Psychosis, How Public Health Disgraced Itself During COVID Mania. And you can get that at the cheapest possible price at my website, diaryofcovid.com. At diaryofcovid.com, I'm just going to send it to you for what it costs me to get it, pack it, and send it to you. So it's going to be the cheapest you can get it anywhere, diaryofcovid.com. Plus, I throw in a couple of free bonuses that you're really going to like. So that's the way to go. And that book is like it's a total demolition of these people. And it's done in my sort of sarcastic and smash them over the head style that I know you crave. So you might as well get it the cheapest possible way. So I don't make any money on this. On that book, I don't make any money. I just sell it to you at cost. So head over to diaryofcovid.com. Not that there'd be anything wrong with that. You know, I do need to keep the lights on around here, but that's how I've chosen to do it. So diaryofcovid.com, go check that out. And thanks so much for listening. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to join me on the best vacation ever. Wait till you see what we've got in, what Scott Horton and I have in store aboard the Tom Woods Cruise next time. So check that out, tomwoodscruise.com, and I'll see you next week.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.